We honestly believed that Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered would struggle on keyboard and mouse. The thrilling, web-swinging and complex slugfests of Insomniac's open-world Spidey game feel so specifically tailored to a PlayStation controller that we couldn't imagine how anyone could feasibly translate it to the PC's traditional control scheme. Yet, not only is Spider-Man Remastered perfectly playable on keyboard and mouse, in some ways, it's superior to the PS4 experience.
If you want to change the world, you have to be the kind of man who can make the hardest decisions.
Swinging through the New York skyline was always the best bit of Insomniac's title, with the Ratchet & Clank studio delivering possibly the best movement system in any game of the last decade. But it's the addition of mouse control that really gives PC the edge, letting you slip through tiny gaps between tenements and skyscrapers in a much smoother fashion than with a pad. Combat, too, is surprisingly at home on a keyboard and mouse, considering how involved Spidey's fighting style is. Almost everything is assigned within easy reach of the left hand. The only notable console hangover is that Spidey's web abilities are chosen from a selection wheel that is brought up by holding down middle mouse. The control adaptation is undoubtedly the most impressive element of Nixie's port. In presentation, sadly, Spider-Man Remastered is not quite as masterful. Whilst unlocked frame rates and DLSS are nice, there are some ongoing issues with the game's ray-traced reflections. A last-minute patch has gone some way to fixing the issue, improving the performance and visual quality, but if you stop and pay attention, you can see the reflections off surfaces like vehicle bodywork just don't look right. Whilst generally decent, the PC port isn't quite a slam dunk. The same can largely be said for the game itself. Spider-Man is a 5-star character in a 3-star world. Peter Parker is arguably the perfect video game protagonist. Incredibly likable and empathetic, powerful but not invincible, and equipped with a traversal system so good it makes you want to explore every nook and cranny of Manhattan. It quickly becomes apparent that Insomniac doesn't really know how to fill out the open world. Many of the game's side quests devolve into simplistic icon chasing, collecting backpacks, chasing pigeons, and playing hide-and-seek minigames with Black Cat. Even the more action-packed optional stuff does little to elaborate on their basic premises. Yet, by far, Spider-Man's biggest shortcoming is its failure to effectively utilize the comic's wonderful roster of villains. Spider-Man probably has the most memorable collection of foes outside of Batman, but unlike the Arkham games, which use Batman's enemies to great effect in the open world, Spider-Man's adversaries barely get a look in until the third act. Instead, most missions involve fighting one of 3 different factions of armed thugs. This isn't a problem in the early game, but if you thought Arkham Knight stretched Rocksteady's combat system to breaking point, Spider-Man's fisticuffs hang by a thread after 25 hours. It's impressive in a way, because the system isn't exactly short on methods to dispatch these hired goons. Yet, the system feels completely exhausted by the time you approach the final act. In short, Spider-Man's open world design is a missed opportunity. But this isn't necessarily a deal breaker. Simply being Spider-Man is an awful lot of fun. And whilst Insomniac's attempt at an open world is lacking, the studio's approach to storytelling is excellent. Indeed, Insomniac arguably does a better job of telling a Spider-Man story than anything in the MCU. Using the additional scope offered by a video game to add some proper depth to both Spidey and the secondary cast. The decision to go with a slightly older Peter Parker is a smart one that lets Insomniac explore already matured relationships between well-known characters. The highlight of the game's character drama is the relationship between Peter and Otto Octavius. The game spends a lot of time establishing their friendship, which makes Otto's slow descent into villainy all the more tragic and effective, even though we know where his character ultimately goes. It's not all drama, however, and Spidey is quippy as ever during the fights.
Writing your memoirs? Don't forget the hyphen between spider and man.
The script is laced with fun jokes, such as an amusing running spider cop gag. As an aside, Spider-Man's portrayal of the NYPD is very favorable, which can be jarring given the seemingly endless controversies surrounding the US police force and the broader debate about law enforcement practices. But the writing is equally capable in the quieter and more serious moments. You genuinely feel for Peter as he desperately tries to hold the city together while his own life falls apart. And although the game doesn't do enough with Spidey's enemy roster, the two villains it focuses on most are both superbly portrayed antagonists. The story is not without its flaws either. The second act is too drawn out, and the third is too short. The playable Mary Jane scenes help lend the character greater agency, but Spider-Man isn't a great stealth game even when you're Spidey. As Mary Jane, they become cramped, insta-fail stealth puzzles with poor signposting, and are easily the most frustrating sections in the game. But even when the game is at its most irritating, there is still something irresistibly likable about it. When you're swinging through Times Square in glorious sunshine as New York's citizenry gazes agog at you from below, well, it's a superhero high that even the caped Crusader would struggle to beat. Insomniac's Spider-Man is as lovable as ever, even if the surrounding game can't quite live up to him.